of a medieval lockup. It would not be exaggerating to say that my friend and I received a cool welcome from Sergeant Berry, whose domain this appeared to be. "Yes, sir. I do have a young woman in custody here, and I can confirm that she has been charged on suspicion of murder." "And can you tell me," said Holmes, "how she is supposed to have committed this crime?" "Well, obviously, sir, we don't know all the details yet, but with a bit of imagination, an intelligent person might construe that she had lured Mr. Weeks to Nightingale Lane on some, shall we say, enticing pretext, lain in wait for him, and dispatched him with a bullet as he tethered his horse." "And," said Holmes, "would this same intelligent person construe that Jack Carpenter had a part in this?" "Well, yes, sir, that person, assuming he was using his faculties, would conclude that quite obviously Jack Carpenter was an accessory before the fact, and therefore equally culpable." "Thank you, Sergeant," Holmes said, "for simplifying what I, in my sluggishness of mind, had considered a mystifying problem. Might it be possible for us to see the prisoner now?" "I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't permit that." "Or should it wait until I have received authority from my good friend Superintendent Wales at the Yard?" The policeman licked his lips, pretended to consult a piece of paper on his desk, and said, "Well, as you say you are a friend of the superintendent, sir, I'm sure 5 minutes wouldn't hurt." We were shown to a cavernous room where rusted iron remnants of the brewhouse remained bolted to the walls and ceiling. The large skylight had been set with bars, and there were no other windows. A pretty dark-haired girl of no more than 20 years sat at a wooden table. She reacted to us with suspicion as we were admitted, but no sooner had the constable left us alone with her, and no doubt largely in desperation, she confided in us readily. "Miss Miller, we have a limited amount of time," Holmes said to her, "and you must tell us everything you can about this business." "Yes, sir. I'll try. I think I may have done something foolish, sir." "Foolish?" "I think I were the first to find the body, sir, you see." "Well now," said Holmes, "I had certainly not guessed that." "I planned to see my Jack onto the London train," she continued, "but we was held back at the farm delivering a calf, and I knew I was likely to miss him. The train usually stops by a dark hill crossing, so I thought if I cut along Nightingale Lane, I might be able to wave him off. But when I got there, the train was already disappearing across the bridge. Then, a stone's throw from the track, I saw a horse tied up to the fence, and something on the road beside it. When I got up close, I saw who it was. Henry Weeks, covered in blood, and next to him the gun." "And you picked up the gun?" I asked. "Yes, sir." "Why? Why did you not go directly to the police?" "Well, sir, because I recognised the gun. I meant to hide it somewhere. It was Jack's gun, you see." I failed to conceal my shock. "Jack's gun?" "So you took the gun," Holmes said, "because you thought Jack Carpenter might have killed Weeks?" "Yes, sir. That was my fear." "Even though Jack was on the train?" "I didn't know how long Weeks had lain there, sir. It's a lonely place, and he might have been there for hours, so that didn't look good for Jack departing as he did the very same evening. I wasn't sure of nothing, Mr. Holmes, except that Jack was likely to get the blame, everyone knowing about the venom between him and the Weeks family." "And what," Holmes said, "did you do with Jack's gun?" "Wrapped it in my shawl, slung it on my shoulder, and took it home to hide it. But I was unlucky. On the way I passed Sergeant Berry. I think he must afterwards have puzzled over my strange burden, for he came today to search the cottage, and that's when I was arrested." "But Holmes," I said, "if the murder weapon was beside the body, doesn't that at least establish Jack's innocence?" "Unfortunately not, Watson. The assumption we had made was that the murder occurred while Jack was on the train. If it happened well before that, I fear that either he or Miss Miller here remain the prima facie suspects." "But I didn't kill Henry Weeks, sir. I swear to God." "I don't believe you did, Miss Miller, but we have to convince the police of that. Be hopeful." But as we walked back along the lane that evening towards Stovey and the Horse in Colours, Holmes seemed somewhat less certain. "I have little to go on at this moment except instinct, Watson. I do not feel that Jack Carpenter killed Henry Weeks, and I feel even more strongly that that young woman did not do it either. But feelings, I'm afraid, are not evidence. Let's hurry back to the inn and hope the bar is still available to us. Then we can make an assessment of these matters in comfort. The inn was closed to customers when we arrived, but Mr. Carpenter hastily provided us with a bottle of whiskey and some bread and cheese. The fire was still glowing bright, and I sat there for a good hour while my friend went away to ask some questions of our host. Eventually, he returned and reclaimed his seat beside the fire. Can we number the suspects in this case, Watson? Well, apart from Jack Carpenter and the girl Beth Miller, I said, dropping my voice, I suppose Jack's father, our landlord, is another possibility. Yes, and since we know he saw Jack off onto the train, either he or his son would have needed to commit the murder some time earlier. But how early? I've just spoken to him at length. He assures me, and I believe him, that there are plenty of people prepared to swear that both he and Jack were here all afternoon, and Beth spent the day at farm work. Even so, if the police go ahead and prosecute a case against one or all of them, there's a strong chance a jury might find them guilty, based purely on the assumption that they would at some time have had the opportunity. We are not out of the woods yet, Watson. I see what you mean. Our inquiries seem to have stalled, rather. I refilled our glasses from the whiskey bottle, and Holmes puffed at his pipe. Then suddenly he said, "The secret is on that train, Watson. I'm sure that's where it is. What time is it? 20 minutes to 11. Come along. We might just get there before it leaves." It was an old cart that transported us post-haste along the hold and muddy lanes of Stovey, so that we arrived at the station splattered and not a little shaken. We were, however, in good time to meet the 10:59. Unfortunately for us, the station master, Mr. Milton Fraser, was again on duty. Despite his obvious respect for my friend, however, he became instantly resistant on hearing Holmes's request. "No, sir, I'm afraid I most definitely cannot hold up the 10:59 London train. Mr. Fraser, this is no flippant request. An innocent young woman will spend tonight locked in a dungeon, as will her fiancé, unless I am able to complete certain essential inquiries. I ask only for 10 minutes. Mr. Holmes, my reputation may be a small thing by the world's standards, but it is very important to me. 10 minutes is a long time to delay a train. But if I can guarantee you that this will not affect your reputation, can you really do that, sir?" "Mr. Fraser, you have my word on it." A long, thoughtful pause. Then, "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I'll do as you ask." When 2 minutes later the great black locomotive hauled its clanking carriages into the station, Mr. Milton Fraser went straight to the footplate and had words with the engineer. A wave to Holmes and myself, who were some way along the platform, told us all was clear, and we boarded the train. Holmes went directly to the second compartment of the third carriage, which contained just one late passenger, an elderly gentleman sitting beside what I saw immediately to be the medical bag of a general practitioner. "If I may interrupt your peace and quiet, sir," Holmes said, and having outlined his reasons, asked, "Were you aboard this train last night?" "I was," said the older man. "I take this train pretty well every night. I'm a medical man with a practice in Newbury and a home in London." "Were you in this same compartment last night?" The elderly physician laughed. "Creature of habit, sir. Same compartment every night." "And do you recollect the young man who, I believe, got onto the train at this station yesterday?" "I do, as a matter of fact. He sat there, right opposite me by the window. Pleasant young man." "Good. Now, sir, the train stopped at Dark Hill Crossing a little way up the line. Do you recall anything unusual about that?" "Oh, it stops there pretty well every night, but, well, I do remember something, as a matter of fact. The train whistled, as it usually does, to see if the down train is close enough to respond. At just that moment, I remarked a small flash of light outside the train, like the sun reflecting off brass." "And the young man," said Holmes. "What was his response?" "He seemed as puzzled as I was. He said he knew the area and couldn't imagine what it could be." "Thank you, Doctor," said Holmes. He led me briskly from the train. We have just 3 of our 10 minutes left before the train leaves, Watson, but I think it might just be enough. Mr. Fraser was waiting for us on the platform. All done, sir? One final request, Mr. Fraser. Are these the same carriages and in the same order as made up the train last night? Yes, sir. That doesn't change much. Then I'll need to get onto the line to check the other side of the train. I don't know, Mr. Holmes. The down train is due. You'll be at too much risk. I shall be quick. And without further discussion, he re-entered the train, crossed the compartment, opened the further door, and dropped onto the down line beyond. At almost precisely that moment, we heard a whistle, and Fraser said, "By golly, Dr. Watson, that's the down train crossing the bridge." I waited for a half-minute, but when I heard the rumble of the approaching train, I could restrain myself no longer. "Holmes!" I called. "Get a move on, for God's sake!" But the last words of my sentence were drowned by the roar of a locomotive thundering into the station and hissing to a halt next to the 10:59. I'm not sure what I thought had happened. I could see that Holmes had not regained the empty compartment for a terrible moment. I hovered in a cloud of anxiety. Then his head appeared, between the bottom of the train and the platform edge. He had ducked under the stationary train to avoid the incoming express. "Holmes, are you all right?" "More than all right, Watson," he said as he clambered back onto the platform. "Especially as I believe I can now name our murderer." He turned to the rather shaken station master. "The train may leave, Mr. Fraser, but there are conditions. I see there are no facilities for uncoupling a carriage here in Stovey. Correct, sir? There are no sidings here. Then I must ask you to travel to London with the train, and to ensure on arrival that the carriage in which the physician gentleman is travelling is impounded at Paddington." "Good Lord, Mr. Holmes, is the doctor a suspect?" "No, Mr. Fraser, but one might say the carriage is." Despite his misgivings, the station-master was heroically compliant, and directly he had arranged for a message to be sent to his own family, he boarded the 10:59, which had now, for one night only, become the 11:25, and the train pulled out of the station on its way to London. "Well, Holmes, I probably don't need to tell you," I said, "that I am completely baffled." "You can be forgiven for that, Watson. It has been a puzzling business. But you do intend to explain to me how a train carriage could be a suspect in a murder case. I will explain everything when we get back to the Horse and Colours, but first I must ensure that Beth Miller is released from that appalling prison and spends tonight in her own bed." It was long past midnight when we sat again in the comfort of the inn. Though I had not been present when Holmes had put his theory before Sergeant Berry at the makeshift jail, he had clearly made a convincing argument because Beth Miller had been immediately released and sat with us now at the rough-hewn table where Samuel Carpenter, bubbling with the turn in fortune, was proving very liberal with his best ale. "So, who was it, Mr. Holmes? Who was the murderer?" "Well, that's not as simple a question to answer as you might think," said Holmes. "The simple answer is that Henry Weeks was the murderer." "Do you mean it was suicide?" I said. "Well, Watson, whatever we call it, there is no doubt that when Henry Weeks fired the gun, it was to murder Jack Carpenter." Around the table, Mr. Carpenter, Beth Miller, and I, all wearing similar baffled expressions, sat staring at Holmes, waiting for him to elucidate. "Henry Weeks," Holmes said, "went to the spot with the intention of killing young Jack. He knew the train would stop there, and he meant to get a shot at his victim through the carriage window. Things seemed to be going well for him. Jack Carpenter was sitting on the Stovey side of the train, so Weeks would have had a good view of him from the lane. Here is what I believe happened. Weeks took aim, but at the very moment he was about to squeeze the trigger, the train blew its whistle. My guess is that the horse reared up and kicked the butt of the gun, hence that wound on the beast's foreleg. The gun went off. "Ah," said I, "that flash of light the physician on the train mentioned." "Precisely. The sound of the shot was probably drowned by the noise of the train. The gun barrel now tilted down, its aim sent low. The bullet hit the wheel bogie of the carriage. The mark on the metalwork is what I was so keen to check this evening, and ricocheted back to strike Henry Weeks. So the train wheel was the killer, I said. As I say, one could impute the train or the bullet or even the horse as accessories, for all were material in the death. But the fact of the matter is that Henry Weeks, in a rather elegant example of poetic justice, inadvertently murdered himself. Holmes and I took the first train back to London the following morning, passing on our way out of Stovey Station the sight of Weeks's lonely death. "What put you onto it, Holmes?" I asked. "I suppose you could say, Watson, that human goodness put me onto it." "Not deduction, then?" "Samuel Carpenter, his son Jack, Beth Miller. Good people, Watson. We were, if my instinct about them was correct, distinctly short of homicidal candidates. Then you'll recollect the nature of Weeks's head wound. Clearly not suicide, as you noted yourself, because of the shallow nature of the wound. But was it a deep enough lesion to have been caused by a direct hit at close range? That set me wondering about whether the bullet might have rebounded. My examination of the train confirmed it. You're quite right about the wound. I dare say it didn't kill him outright. The poor man probably lay there for some while, bleeding to death in the cold." "Well," said Holmes, "perhaps that bleak hour may have given him time to reconsider the error of his ways."